Hey class, welcome back to EDU C3233. We are moving into the last week of our course, which is crazy to say, but one of the last topics that we're going to look at is knowledge acquisition, or basically learning. We're going to break that down into declarative and procedural knowledge. So we'll take a look at how students acquire or learn declarative knowledge. So thinking about just kind of, as we get started, thinking about the kind of two types of knowledge that are represented in long-term memory. Remember, going back to maybe intro psych, and I think we maybe even talked about memory just briefly in this chapter, in this course, but once we kind of get things into memory, we store, we encode, we store, we retrieve it. We've got it into long-term memory. And typically what we're talking about in terms of learning, you have declarative knowledge. These are knowledge about things versus procedural knowledge, which is knowledge of how to do things. And there's a lot of overlap. For example, like, you in order to learn the procedure of how to tie your shoes, for example, as a really young child, you have to have that declarative knowledge about what a shoe is. You have to know the different parts, the strings, the tongue, and all that stuff. And same thing if you're learning how to drive a car, the procedural steps of learning how to drive a car aren't really possible without that declarative knowledge. So yes, we are talking about these things separately, but there's a lot of overlap. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're going to focus more so on this left-hand side, the declarative knowledge about things. And there's typically two main types of things. These are things that you would be teaching in a classroom, or, if you're a parent, you might even be teaching these things to a young child or something along the way. It could be isolated facts or information. So if you're a math teacher, maybe you teach Pythagorean theorem, or maybe you teach, quadratic equation, for example. That's a piece of declarative knowledge that we want students to learn. And then there's also more meaningful, elaborated, and organized information that's this kind of stuff. We're really willing to focus on, because which information tends to be remembered best and why? Well, the research evidence shows that the more meaningful it is, the more we can elaborate on it, the more organized it is, the more likely it is we can actually pull that information out of long-term memory. When information tends to be more isolated, we don't have as many things to connect to. So you can really think about memory and knowledge and learning as really just making connections. The more connections we have, the more likely we can actually pull that stuff out of memory. And so when something is more meaningful, when we elaborate on it, when we make more personal connections to it, when we organize our information in a meaningful way, we tend to be able to remember those things. We're basically creating more opportunities for our memory to kind of grab onto and pull that out of. How do we pull that out of long-term memory? So how do we foster elaboration? How do we get students to elaborate on information and make it more than just discrete facts? Well, one, you want to keep it, especially the younger they are, less is more. It tends to be better. We don't want to overwhelm them with information. You really want to boil it down to its most critical elements, especially for children in those elementary school years. When possible, you want to activate and use relevant background information. For most students, unless you're teaching like pre-K and kindergarten where they're maybe coming to school for the first time, most kids have experience in some way or another with the things that you might be teaching about. Now, some kids are going to have more experience than others, but if you can find something that they already have some kind of connection to, let's say if you're a science teacher and you're building on from some of the science ideas that students learned in a previous class or a previous semester or whatever, you can tap back into that, because that really is letting them know that, hey, you already know some of this stuff. We're maybe just kind of looking at it in a different way. We're tapping into that pump. We're priming that pump, so to speak. And then personal relevance is really important. The more students can make it personal, the more they can connect it to their own experiences, the better. Hopefully you can kind of see that in the assignments that we do in this class. It's not just about regurgitating the theories that we're asking you to learn in terms of ed psych, but also those personal connections. So I think that's the most important part to me in this class is not only do you understand the theory, but you're able to connect it to your own personal experiences. And the more students can do that, the easier it is for them to draw upon from memory. It's personally relevant. So what are some strategies? Emphasizing advanced organizers. Have your students, write out their ideas. We're going to give you some examples. These are different kind of examples. We can advance organize. If you're teaching things about like a subject on transportation, you might have a visual way aid. You might also kind of tap into schemata, kind of their prior experiences as well. we have schemas or scripts for expectations, and you can kind of tap into those. Teaching effective studying skills, not just, hey, read the book and ask questions, but it might be like read the book and question yourself and be able to summarize in your own words and organize the main points and provide personal examples, maybe separate from what the textbook or what the class is giving you. And then finally, teacher questioning, having students, instead of the teacher being the one who gives the information, the teacher's job more or less becomes drawing out the information using good questioning. Maybe it's Socratic questioning methods, excuse me. But really, that's just kind of getting students to kind of do more of the cognitive work. So that's going to be it. We will switch gears and look at procedural knowledge next. So see you on the other side. See you then. Take care.